I'm having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I am so out of breath.
There's photos and videos of them on a secret trip to the Great Sand Dunes while Shanann and Chris's two baby girls were away on vacation.
There you go, baby.
That's Watts you hear behind the camera.
You're so damn sexy.
HLN also obtained voicemail messages Nicole Kessinger left for Watts. She giggles like a schoolgirl.
Hi. It's me. I miss your face. I was just calling to say hi.
Watts also took these provocative photos of his 30-year-old co-worker. He stored them in a hidden folder on his smartphone.
He hides this app called Secret Calculator. It looks and functions like a regular calculator, but when you enter 4 digits, it's a secret vault. It opens up and it reveals hidden photos and videos.
Watts claims he came clean about the affair to his pregnant wife Shanann the night he killed her and their daughters. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave and dumped his girls in silos of crude oil. The mistress told cops she had no idea he was planning to murder his family.
This shocked me just as much as I think it shocked the rest of the world.
Watts is serving 3 life sentences, but being behind bars hasn't stopped his womanizing ways. This woman, who calls herself Anna, seems to be infatuated with him.
I visit him about every 2 to 3 weeks.
But Nicole Kessinger has cut off all ties to the monster.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I'm having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I am so out of breath.
There you go, baby. You're so damn sexy.
From the outside, Chris Watts appeared to be living the kind of life many people strive for. He had a wife who was outspoken and ambitious, 2 young daughters who adored him, and another child on the way. There was a house in a quiet neighborhood, steady employment, and carefully curated images that suggested stability and happiness. To friends, co-workers, and anyone scrolling through social media, nothing seemed broken. But appearances have a way of hiding fractures that only reveal themselves when pressure is applied. Behind that image, dissatisfaction was quietly growing. Not the kind that explodes into arguments or public conflict, but the kind that retreats inward. Chris Watts was not a man known for confrontation. He avoided difficult conversations, buried resentment, and chose silence over honesty. And in that silence, something dangerous began to form. When the mistress entered his life, she did not arrive as the cause of collapse, but as an escape route. She represented a version of himself without responsibility, without history, without demands. This story is often simplified into a tale of infidelity, but that explanation is too shallow. People have affairs every day without committing unimaginable acts. The real question is not why Chris Watts had an affair, but why he began to see his family as something standing in the way of the life he wanted. That shift did not happen overnight. It was built slowly, through avoidance, fantasy, and a growing belief that starting over was easier than facing the truth. As we uncover what led to that choice, this story moves beyond headlines and into psychology. If you're drawn to true crime stories that examine motives beneath the surface, consider subscribing to The Hidden Verdict. Here, the focus isn't just on what happened, but why. By the time Chris Watts stood at the edge of his double life, the affair was no longer just a secret. It was a reflection of something already broken, waiting for an excuse to be revealed. The affair began quietly, without the drama people often expect. There was no sudden declaration, no reckless public display. Instead, it unfolded in private messages, shared moments, and the careful construction of a second life. For Chris Watts, the mistress became more than a romantic interest. She became a space where expectations disappeared. With her, he was not a husband navigating conflict or a father weighed down by responsibility. He was admired, listened to, and unburdened. As the relationship deepened, his behavior at home shifted. He grew distant, emotionally unavailable, and increasingly detached from the rhythms of family life. Yet he avoided confrontation at all costs. Rather than addressing his dissatisfaction or seeking separation, he chose compartmentalization. Family existed in one mental box, the affair in another. That split allowed him to function without guilt, at least temporarily. Secrecy itself became addictive. It gave him control and a sense of power he lacked in his real life. When Chris later spoke about the affair, he often minimized its importance, framing it as a brief distraction. But his actions told a different story. He altered routines, lied effortlessly, and invested emotionally in a future that did not include his family. The mistress did not replace his wife in his heart, she replaced accountability in his mind. She represented a life where problems dissolved instead of demanded solutions. If you're listening and recognizing how emotional avoidance can quietly escalate into something far more dangerous, take a moment to like this video. It helps bring these deeper conversations into the open. By the time the affair fully took hold, Chris Watts had already begun rewriting his internal narrative. In that story, responsibility felt like a burden, and escape felt like a solution. To understand why Chris Watts chose that path, you have to look beyond romance and into psychology. Those who have studied his behavior point to a pattern of emotional immaturity and conflict avoidance. Chris struggled with expressing dissatisfaction, setting boundaries, or confronting uncomfortable truths. Instead of dealing with problems directly, he suppressed them. Over time, that suppression created resentment he never learned how to manage. Divorce, in his mind, represented exposure. It meant difficult conversations, financial consequences, judgment from others, and the loss of the carefully maintained image of the good guy. The mistress, on the other hand, represented silence and validation. There were no shared histories, no expectations of responsibility, and no need to explain himself. She saw the version of Chris Watts he wanted to be, not the one shaped by years of obligation. This is why the choice was never really about love. It was about control. With his family, he felt trapped by expectations. With the mistress, he felt admired without effort. Psychologists often note that individuals who fear confrontation sometimes gravitate toward situations that allow them to avoid accountability entirely. In Chris Watts' case, the fantasy offered relief from the emotional labor he refused to face. As you consider this, think about what truly drives destructive decisions. Is it desire, or is it the refusal to take responsibility? Share your thoughts in the comments. Was this about love, ego, or control? Because when responsibility begins to feel unbearable, some people don't walk away. They look for a way to erase the problem instead. While Chris Watts immersed himself in the fantasy of a life with his mistress, the reality of his family faded in his mind. Shannon, Bella, Cece, and the unborn child were no longer individuals with needs, emotions, and dreams, they became obstacles to the story he was writing for himself. Emotional detachment led to moral detachment. The longer he ignored the weight of responsibility, the easier it became to view his family as inconveniences rather than loved ones. Society often simplifies this tragedy by blaming the affair alone, but the truth is more disturbing. The danger lay not in desire, but in indifference. When a person becomes detached enough, ordinary ethical boundaries weaken, and unimaginable acts begin to feel logical within their own twisted framework. Chris Watts' affair was not the trigger, it was the mirror reflecting a man who had already abandoned empathy and accountability. The silence in the household grew. Neighbors and friends noticed little, because outward appearances remained carefully managed. Online, photos of a happy family told a story entirely different from the one unfolding behind closed doors. This dual life created a tension that could no longer be contained, and it was precisely this tension that pushed him toward irreversible choices. If this makes you pause and reflect, consider sharing this video. Conversations about hidden warning signs, moral detachment, and accountability are crucial, not just for true crime enthusiasts, but for everyone paying attention to human behavior. By the time the critical decision was made, Chris Watts had already chosen escape over responsibility. The children, the wife, the unborn child, all were barriers to a life he wanted, not the life he had. And when someone reaches that point of indifference, the consequences are devastating, permanent, and irreversible. In the end, the real reason Chris Watts chose the mistress over his family was never about love. It was about escape, control, and the avoidance of responsibility. The affair was not a cause, it was a reflection of a deeper, darker mindset. He did not see his family as people to be cherished or protected, he saw them as burdens that stood in the way of the life he believed he deserved. That quiet, calculating detachment allowed him to rationalize choices that no one should ever make. The Watts case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. Evil does not always announce itself with rage or violence. Sometimes it grows quietly, hidden behind smiles, photos, and everyday routines, until it finally erupts with irreversible consequences. The affair was merely the lens through which Chris Watts' true priorities were revealed: self-preservation over love, fantasy over reality, control over accountability. As you reflect on this story, consider what it teaches us about emotional avoidance, moral detachment, and the dangers of ignoring warning signs. This is why the case continues to fascinate and horrify us years later. Some truths cannot be hidden, and some actions leave marks that time can never erase. If you found this analysis insightful, take a moment to subscribe to The Hidden Verdict, like this video, and share it so others can examine the hidden motives behind true crime cases. Comment below with your thoughts. Was this a story of love gone wrong, or a chilling example of human indifference? Chris Watts' choice was deliberate, calculated, and final. The affair did not destroy his family, it exposed who he truly was. And that truth, more than any headline, remains haunting.